In today's video, yet another weekly condo market update where I go through downtown condo prices by specific neighborhood and community in the month that was. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realty Realty. As always, you can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions you may have. If any questions arise during this video, any other video I have had on YouTube, and any other topics I've discussed, or if you have any general inquiries with regards to the Toronto/GTA real estate market. For those who have gotten in touch with me and I have not gotten back to you yet, I sincerely apologize. I'm still working through the emails, the DMs. A lot of people reach out to me via the phone, Instagram, Gmail, through my office. So I'm working my way through. And of course, I'm a full-time real estate agent as well, right? I'm around the city every other day working with sellers and buyers. So I'm quite busy. So I really appreciate your patience on that matter. Lastly, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Your support in that regard, as always, greatly appreciated. But as always, I also say you're not obliged to do so. Feel free not to subscribe, not to comment, not to like. Hey, the fact that you take the time out of your day just to watch my videos, that is compliment enough. You don't need to do any of that. Anyways, let's get to the point of today's video, which is downtown condominiums, and I'm going to break down downtown condo prices for the month that was September 2021 in full by specific neighborhood. We're going to go through each neighborhood: Trinity Bellwoods, Waterfront, Little Portugal, Church-Yonge corridor. Going to give you the breakdown, what we saw in terms of sales, how the market is looking in that specific community/neighborhood, and on the screen in the description you can find a link to the maps as well, so you're not lost as to the districting of the specific neighborhoods, because sometimes it can be a little confusing. It's not as practical as you would like it to be, right? Most people who are not in real estate, when you say Little Portugal, they have something else in mind than what we're actually discussing on the sales front of things, at least in the industry. All right, enough of that. Let's get to it. Starting out with Bay Street corridor, which saw an average sold price of $942,000 across all condominium types. So for this list, we're talking about all condominium types with the exclusion of townhome condominiums, so condominium apartments and lofts, and across all bedroom numbers. So it's $950,000 in terms of average, and in terms of median, we're looking at $750,000. This is based upon 78 transactions that occurred in September of 2021. Now, off the bat, when we see such a big variance between the median sold price and the average sold price, right, that shows us that the data in terms of the entries of the sold prices, right, out of the 78 sales or so, is not very much so symmetrical whatsoever. It's not equally distributed, right? So I went thoroughly through the solds, and what we have in Bay Street corridor is a lot of higher end solds that carried up the average to 950. So if you're looking at it based upon just the average, it's not the fairest estimate. At the same time, the median of 750 prices this area a little too low. Expanding on that point, in this area there was 6 solds out of the 70 solds that gave us the average of 950. There were 6 solds above $2 million, right? Which we don't really see anywhere else other than perhaps C1 Waterfront, which we'll get to. And out of the 6 sold, of which were all above $2 million, 3 of them were above $3 million, with the highest being around $3.7 million for a condominium. So of course this has an impact of carrying up the averages. Nonetheless, Bay Street corridor, although the price and activity has been tempered a bit in this area, even provided for the slowdown in prices into September and into August and so far into October, in the last 3 or 4 months, it has seen great value appreciation simply due to the fact that a lot of people are returning back to downtown for work purposes now, if they weren't already there, and rental rates, that causes rental rates to go up. And we know the strong connection between the condominium purchase and sale market market and the condominium rental market, especially downtown, right? And where do people go to work? A lot of white collar jobs. Well, it's more so around the Bay Street corridor area. Of course, they work all over in downtown, but you get the point. The Bay Street corridor is not known to be the entertainment district of downtown. It's known to be the white collar working district for a lot of banks, financial institutions, and even hospitals. Now, going through a couple of buildings, for instance, in this area, one of the most expensive buildings in all of downtown Toronto actually resides in this area, 77 Charles Street. When we break it down per square foot price, it's the fourth most expensive condominium. Once again, when we break it down per square foot in downtown Toronto, coming in at an average of $16.40 per square foot, which is really high. For this reason, it's a very low transacted building in this area, and in September, we only saw one transaction from this building. Whereas there's a lot of user-friendly buildings in contrast, a older but much cheaper building in this area that I'm a huge fan of is 1001 Bay, where you're looking at below 1,000 per square foot. So within context of Bay Street is actually one of the cheaper areas. And the reason I'm a big fan of 1001 Bay, I think it's really good for investors and end users, given the per square foot price. Once again, it's one of the cheaper ones in Bay Street corridor, and it's also seen a 7% annual increase in average sold price. So market activity in that building has been very strong. Moving on to Little Portugal, which in sharp contrast to Bay Street corridor, I'm very much so a big fan of Bay Street corridor, and we went through the prices there and the growth. Little Portugal is probably my least favorite area in downtown Toronto. In September, we saw an average sold price of $700,000 and a median of $643,000 based on 28 transactions, so 50 less than the Bay Street corridor we were discussing just now. And one of the reasons I'm not a large fan of Little Portugal is because you don't have a lot of good builds here, and then you have one of, in my opinion, the worst buildings in all of, let's just say Canada, but not to be hyperbolic, let's say Toronto, which is 36 Lisgar. I don't like this building. This building provides you with some of the cheapest per square foot, and when you're looking at it on paper, you're going through potential options for you or your significant other for investment purposes, for end using purposes. You see, wow, this building has some of the cheapest one bedroom options, 1+1 options. Let's jump on this. It's an opportunity that apparently the whole market is missing, and there's a reason for that. Typically, you have to look deeper into why. And the reason this building provides you with some of the cheapest options in Little Portugal is because it's not a good building whatsoever. People are trying to sell. People are trying to get out. There's a series of problems with the management company, the condominium corp, the security is on a revolving door. There's a new security company every other day. The cheap builds is not good quality whatsoever. 80% of the units have horrible exposure. On average, this building is far more expensive than the area of Little Portugal in terms of maintenance fee. And it's a new building. It's not supposed to be higher than the average maintenance fee for its own area. But moving on, just to expand into the area a bit more, because we're looking at the average sold price of $700,000, which is going to be the second cheapest we're going to discuss in this list, in this video. It's because this area naturally doesn't have a lot of inventory, at least compared to, Bay Street corridor, Church-on corridor, Waterfront, but also the fact that it doesn't have a lot of higher end penthouses. And especially in the month of September, we didn't see a lot of higher end transactions here. It was only one above $1 million that sold in this area. That's why the average sold price is $700 and the median is $643, although there's that variance of $60,000 once more. It's very fair estimate for what the market is for this area, at least as of the fall, at least as of September 2021. Moving on, Trinity Bellwoods. In September, we saw an average sold price of $857,000, a median sold price of $867,000. This was based upon a mere 6 transactions. So you see the rapid fall of inventory, or at least not the rapid fall. I mean, in this case, the rapid fall. But as we go through the list, you'll see the changing array of inventory of given available, because the number of transactions is typically a good indication of how much inventory there exists in a given area. So not a lot of inventory in Trinity Bellwoods. Trinity Bellwoods, though, the reason we're looking at 867, right? Because you might assume, well, there's not a lot of inventory, not a lot of condos. Why is the selling price so high? First and foremost, it's, in my opinion, one of the best areas in downtown Toronto. It's the only neighborhood in south central downtown, excluding certain locations of C2, where you're kind of bordering on Midtown and downtown. But in downtown, it's one of the only neighborhoods where you get the suburban feel. So it feels like the suburbs. You have a lot of detached, of course, narrow lots, because at the end of the day, it's downtown, but you have a lot of detached, a lot of semis, a lot of townhomes, a lot of parks, Trinity Bellwood Park. It really much so feels like, once again, you're in the suburbs. It's parks and ravines and walkways. It's a family-oriented area, as much as you can get that in downtown at least, right? And another reason the average sold price here is so high is because Trinity Bellwoods houses a lot of lofts. A lot of the inventory options available in Trinity Bellwoods happen to be lofts. So for instance, let's break that down. Out of the 6 sold that provided us with this high average sold price of $650,000 to $660,000, out of that 6 sold, 3 of them belong to 901 Queen Street, all 3 of which were lofts. And 901 Queen Street has a lot of 2-story / loft unit options, right? Now, out of the 6 sold, although 3 belong to 901 Queen Street and all were lofts, another additional unit that was sold from this area was also a loft. So in total, we have 4 out of 6 total sold units that were either 2-story or lofts. So that also has an impact of making the options a little bit pricier. In contrast, the traditional condominium apartments in this area are actually decently priced. On average, more expensive than Niagara or Little Portugal, but still cheaper than Bay Street Corridor or certain parts of Yonge Corridor, for instance. Moving on, next neighborhood, Regent Park. Now, the thing about Regent Park is the first neighborhood we're discussing in this video that's part of C8 technically. I've actually gotten a lot of feedback that people say C8, C1. What's the difference? The map, once again, in the description. I'll probably post some images on the screen. But moving on to C8, Regent Park. September of 2021, the average sold price was $665,000 in Regent Park. And the median, we were coming at $616,000. So Regent Park is one of the newer, more recently developed areas in downtown. You have a cluster of a lot of new builds. Your older condominium options here are far and few between. You have a couple like River Street. There's a couple on River Street. And coming in at $665, this is going to be the cheapest neighborhood in downtown that we're going to discuss in today's video. But completely like Little Portugal, for instance, which I said was the second cheapest, coming in at $700,000. This is coming below $600,000. I'm very bullish on this area. I actually really think this area has a lot of future potential. When we look at within the last calendar year, it's already shown a lot of price growth. Not quite to the levels of Bay Street Corridor or portions of Yonge Corridor or Waterfront, but nonetheless a healthy price increase within the last calendar year. At least a couple days into October now, things have been picking up a little bit in terms of price, but in September, out of the 9 sold, 8 were actually sold at bidding, which is interesting because I'm seeing a lot of failed bidding wars in other areas of downtown or in general, really GTA. And typically the ubiquitous nature of bidding wars for inventory is indicative of newer developments, because 8 out of 9, it's crazy, right? It's almost like 90 some odd percent of the total solds were sold at bidding. Next up, we're gonna look at the sister neighborhood of Bay Street Corridor, Yonge Corridor. In September of 2021, in Yonge Corridor, we saw an average sold price of $769,000 and a median of $660 based on 94 transactions. Much like Bay Street Corridor, Yonge Corridor, if you look at them on a map, they're right next to each other. And things are never so clean in real life, right? When I'm working with buyers don't think of, at least even the intermediate buyers, novice to intermediate buyers, don't really think of things in these senses, and necessarily neither do I all the time. Of course, sometimes we have to look at this districting for analysis purposes, but it's never so clean. Like if you're looking at King Street, it's not going to make that much of a difference for you if 1 block further down in King Street is now C8, now it's C1, right? But the point here is though, they're both termed corridor because they look like corridors, like they're long in terms of their vertical nature. As a result, the same thing applies with regards to Bay Street Corridor. Yonge Corridor, you have various array of options in terms of higher end units and lower end units, in terms of size, in terms of newer buildings. That's why we typically see a gap between the median and the average sold price. Now, one of the key distinctions between Yonge and Bay Street Corridor I would have to mention is that Yonge actually has a higher variance in terms of the age of the buildings, right? So what do I mean by that? In the month of September of 2021, the 2 most transacted buildings in Yonge Corridor were the following: 251 Jarvis and 210 Victoria. Now, starting out with 251 Jarvis, it's a newer building of the age of 1 year, right? And this building had 12 transactions in September. That makes up the largest segment of all the transactions originating from one building in this area, right? 12 transactions. And buildings like 251 Jarvis have a lot of revolving inventory, a lot of sales, a lot of leases, you know, a continuous listing, even in slower periods, more than other buildings. Partially is obviously due to the number of units. There's a high number of units in this building. But for instance, as of right now, at the time of recording of this video, which this video is being recorded October 7th of 2021, you're probably going to see it on October 8th or 9th. There's 20 units for sale. There's 20 units for lease. It's definitely, you know, once again, revolving inventory. Now, when we compare it to the other building I just brought up, which is the second most transacted building in this Church-Yonge quarter, 210 Victoria, that's a much older, mature building, less revolving inventory, less sales. Sales tend to be on the market longer. Leases tend to be on the market longer. Once again, due to the older nature of the building, 17 years old. Point here is Church-Yonge corridor, even more so than Bay Street corridor, we see this variance in terms of newer buildings that are very much so transacted and older buildings that are less transacted. All right, moving on to C1 Waterfront. Once again, to be distinguished from C8 Waterfront, which I will cover, and I know once again can sound confusing, but the maps are in the description and on the screen. We saw a average sold price of $840,000, which was based on 216 transactions, and by far the most amount of transactions for any neighborhood or community in downtown Toronto, right? This is really the core of downtown Toronto as most people envision it. Now, one thing of interest though, even though it's out of 216, by far the most transactions, this is the fourth consecutive month that the amount of transactions for this area has dipped. Not so much so the case for any other area we've discussed here, right? It fluctuates. But for C1 Waterfront, they have dipped precipitously in a linear fashion. June, we had 262. July, we had 252. August, we had around 230 or 225, somewhere around there. It's right now not on the top of mind right now. Now we have 216. The condominium market has not really cooled to a substantial degree in the city of Toronto or York region by any means, but it hasn't increased at the same pace all over that we have expected. And since C1 Waterfront makes up the largest portion of transactions for downtown Toronto, it makes sense when we look at downtown Toronto overall, as we did in the previous video, the Treb resale market report, where we saw condo prices had cooled down a bit. They were still up year over year and month over month in most cases, but not at the same degree that most people projected. Downtown Toronto, out of all areas, especially when it comes to Midtown, North York, prices stagnated the hardest in downtown. And when breaking down to between C8, C1 especially. And since once again, Waterfront makes up a large portion of what C1 is, right? 216 is a lot. It makes perfect sense why we have seen a dip in transactions. Moving on, I'm gonna step up the pace here a bit because it's gonna be a 4-hour video at this pace. But Niagara, where we saw an average sold price of $790 and a median sold price of $713 based on 98 transactions. Now Niagara, I'm very ambivalent on it personally, but lately I've been seeing decent price action here. Now, the thing about the Niagara region and this area of downtown with regards to condominiums, you have a lot of condominium clusters. Whether it's the same development, most cases, yes, there's the same development, different buildings in the same development. Some cases, not really, right? The different buildings within 5 to 10 years of each other, right? What I mean by that, okay, for instance, the East Liberty buildings are in this region. Furthermore, the Fort York buildings are in this region. And in Fort York and East Liberty, you have 3 to 4 well-transacted buildings that make up a large portion of all the transactions in any given month, and September was no different. And also in Niagara, you have some buildings that had the issue with the Clytech plumbing, so you should really much so do your homework with any condos in these areas. So some of them have not replaced the Clytech plumbing issue. And for instance, with some of the Fort York buildings, you have some of the cheapest water views that can be found in downtown Toronto. C1 water views, you're looking at like the Harbor Square buildings, and even though they're much older and the maintenances are much higher, so the 55, 50, 60 Harbor Square, those older ones, they're gonna get a cheaper PSF per square foot than the newer ones. Nonetheless, they're still more expensive than the Niagara Waterview buildings, such as Fort York. Ending the video with C8 Waterfront. So not C1, we discussed C1, now we're discussing C8 Waterfront. coming in at an average sold price in September of 2021 at $790,000 and a median of $770,000 based on 44 transactions. And this is actually a low amount of transactions for this area. And another fact is when we see the median and the average so close, as we did, for instance, with Trinity Bellwoods, I didn't touch on that, I think, when I was discussing Trinity Bellwoods. Here it shows us once again that the assortment of prices and sold prices in the data set is much more evenly distributed, and there's a lot of symmetry. So you don't have a lot of penthouses that are selling that are carrying up the averages. On the low end of things, you don't have a lot of lower end condominiums that are selling that are carrying down the average. And this isn't usually actually the case with CA Waterfront, interestingly enough. Some of the buildings in this area, some of the more famous buildings I've discussed in the past are the Esplanade buildings, namely 8 Esplanade, 1 Esplanade. It's going to be interesting to see the homeless shelter situation in the Esplanade, how it's going to continue to have an impact in prices going towards when we look at October in length, for buildings, once again, around that area, especially the Esplanade buildings. And anyways, that's today's video. And some of the areas that didn't really cover, such as University, Moss Park, Chinatown, just simply ran out of time. I apologize. I didn't have time to look at the sales data in those areas thoroughly as I wanted to, but I'll cover in future videos. Thank you very much for watching. This is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate. My contact info in the description. Subscribe, comment, rate, and review. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay tuned, and have a great long weekend. Thank you.